The dust still hung in the air 3 days after everything fell apart. Elara sat in what used to be her bedroom, though now it had no roof and only 2 walls left standing. She was 6 years old, and she held a stuffed rabbit that was burned black on one side. The rabbit's name was Hopper, and it was the only thing she had left. The colony world of New Haven had been her home since she was born. It was a small place on the edge of space where humans had come to mine special crystals from deep underground. Her mother had worked in the medical center, and her father had been an engineer. They had lived in a dome with 300 other people, and Elara had thought it was the whole universe. Then the ground had shaken. The dome had cracked, and everything had fallen down. Elara didn't understand what the adults meant when they said structural failure or corporate negligence. She only knew that her parents had been in the central dome when it collapsed. She knew that people had screamed. She knew that the sky had turned orange with fire, and that the air had tasted like metal and smoke. Now she sat alone. The other survivors were scattered across the ruins, too hurt or too shocked to notice one small girl. Someone had given her a blanket. Someone else had left food that she couldn't eat. Her stomach felt like a stone, and her throat was too tight to swallow. The sun was setting on the 3rd day. The cold was coming. New Haven had 2 suns, but at night, when both were gone, the temperature dropped fast. Elara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and hugged Hopper close to her chest. She had been trying so hard to be brave. The other children at the emergency shelter had cried, and the adults had held them. But Elara had no one to hold her. The medical people were too busy with the injured. The rescue workers were too busy digging through rubble. Everyone was too busy for a little girl who wasn't bleeding or screaming. So she had walked away from the shelter. She had come back to where her home used to be, and she had sat down to wait, though she didn't know what she was waiting for. As the sky turned from orange to purple to black, something inside Elara finally broke. The tears came first, hot and silent, running down her dirty cheeks. Then her breath started to hitch in her chest, and then, as the first stars appeared above her, she began to cry. It wasn't a normal cry. It started as a whimper, then grew into a wail, then became something bigger than she was. Elara cried for her mother who would never braid her hair again. She cried for her father who would never lift her onto his shoulders. She cried for her home that was gone, for her friends who were lost, for the fear that lived in her chest like a cold hand squeezing her heart. The sound that came from her was the sound of pure grief. It was the sound of a child who had lost everything and had no words for the pain. It echoed across the ruins of the colony, bouncing off broken walls and shattered domes. But it didn't stop there. Something strange happened as Elara cried. Her voice found frequencies that human ears couldn't quite hear. The sound waves rippled out in ways that normal sound didn't travel. Her grief, so pure and so desperate, began to punch through the fabric of space itself. It traveled fast, faster than light, faster than the radio signals that the broken communication array could no longer send. It moved through dimensions that humans didn't have names for, carrying one simple message. A child was in pain, and there was no one to help her. Thousands of light years away, in a part of space that no human had ever seen, something heard. The Drakari had been old when Earth was young. They were beings of crystal and light, massive beyond comprehension, living in the space between stars. They had no homeworld. They had no empire. They simply existed, moving through the cosmos on currents that only they could sense. And they had one law, one rule that every Drakari followed. When a child cries for help, you answer. Syrinx was ancient even among the Drakari. It had witnessed the birth of stars and the death of civilizations. Its crystalline body was the size of a small moon, and its mind held memories that spanned millions of years. It had been drifting through the outer reaches of a dying galaxy, contemplating the mathematics of entropy, when it felt the call. At first, it was just a ripple, a disturbance in the cosmic background. But as Syrinx focused its vast senses, it heard the unmistakable sound. A juvenile in distress. The species didn't matter. The location didn't matter. Somewhere, a child was crying, and there was no guardian to answer. Saryx turned its massive form toward the source of the sound. Its crystalline structure began to resonate with purpose, and it started to move. Other Drakari felt it too. Across the sector, ancient beings stirred from their meditations and their wanderings. They all heard the same thing, and they all knew what they had to do. On New Haven, Alara cried until she had no tears left. Her voice grew hoarse. Her body shook with cold and exhaustion. She slumped against the broken wall, holding Hopper close, and stared up at the stars with empty eyes. She didn't notice at first when one of the stars began to move. It was small at first, just a point of light that seemed a little brighter than the others. But it was growing, moving, coming closer. Other survivors noticed. Someone pointed at the sky and shouted. More people came out of the shelters and the medical tents. They stared upward as more lights appeared, all of them moving, all of them getting brighter. "What is that?" someone whispered. "Rescue ships," another person said hopefully. "They finally got our distress signal." But the lights were wrong. They moved too smoothly. They grew too bright. And there were too many of them, appearing from nowhere like stars being born in the night sky. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the colony's chief medical officer and the closest thing to a leader the survivors had, watched the sky with growing unease. She had worked in space colonies for 20 years. She knew what ships looked like when they approached a planet. "These weren't ships. Get everyone to the shelter," she said quietly. Then, louder, "Everyone inside. Now. Everyone. Everyone. Everyone." People scrambled, but Alara didn't move. She sat in the ruins of her home, watching the lights grow brighter, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 days. Not hope, exactly. Not yet. But something like recognition. Something was coming. Something had heard her. In the sky above New Haven, the first of the Drakari began to enter the atmosphere. Saryx's massive crystalline form caught the light of the twin suns, just beginning to rise on the other side of the planet. Rainbow light scattered across the clouds as something impossible descended toward the broken colony. The ground began to vibrate. Not like the earthquake that had destroyed the domes. This was different. Gentler. Like the purr of some enormous cat. If a cat could be the size of a mountain. Alara stood up on shaky legs. She dropped the blanket and walked forward, away from the wall, into the open space where her yard used to be. She tilted her head back and watched as the light grew brighter and brighter until it hurt to look at. And then, just as the sun crested the horizon, Saryx landed. The impact was surprisingly soft for something so massive. The dragon's crystalline body settled into the valley just beyond the colony, filling the landscape with its presence. It was beautiful and terrible and completely beyond anything Alara had words for. She stood in the ruins of her home, a tiny figure in a torn dress, and looked up at the impossible being that had come across the stars. And for the first time in 3 days, she felt something other than grief. She felt seen. The thing in the valley didn't move, like anything alive should move. It didn't breathe. It didn't blink. But it was alive in a way that made Alara's skin tingle, like standing too close to the power generators her father used to maintain. Dr. Tanaka ran toward Alara, her medical coat flapping behind her. "Child, get back. Get to the shelter." But Alara didn't run. She couldn't. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, and her eyes were locked on the massive crystalline form that filled the horizon. The dragon was made of something that looked like diamond, but it moved. Colors flowed through it like oil on water, shifting from deep blue to purple to gold. Its body was segmented, almost like an insect, but graceful. And it had what might have been a head, though it was hard to tell where one part ended and another began. More survivors emerged from the shelters, fear and curiosity fighting on their faces. Some grabbed weapons, though What good a pistol would do against something the size of a hill was anyone's guess. Others just stared, their mouths open in shock. Then the dragon spoke. The sound didn't come from any mouth or speaker. It came from everywhere at once, resonating through the ground, vibrating through the air, humming through bone and blood. It was too deep for normal hearing, but Alara felt it in her chest like a second heartbeat. The words were not in any human language, yet somehow she understood them. It was like the meaning bypassed her ears entirely and wrote itself directly into her mind. Who has harmed the little one? Ilara's breath caught. The dragon wasn't asking the adults. It was asking about her. She took a step forward. Then, another. Doctor. Tanaka grabbed her shoulder, but Ilara shrugged free and kept walking toward the valley's edge. Ilara, stop. Dr. Tanaka called. But the girl didn't listen. She walked until she stood at the edge of where the ground dropped away into the valley. The dragon's form rose up in front of her, like a living cliff face. This close, she could see that its surface wasn't smooth. It was covered in tiny facets, millions of them, each one catching the light and throwing it back in different colors. I'm Ilara, she said in a small voice. Nobody harmed me. Not on purpose. The building fell down. My mommy and daddy are gone. The dragon shifted. Segments of its body moved with a sound like wind chimes. Crystalline plates, sliding against each other. A portion of what might have been its head lowered until it was closer to Ilara's level, though it was still far above her. Buildings do not fall without cause, the dragon said. And this time, the words felt gentler. Where are your guardians? Dead, Ilara said simply. She had run out of tears. The word was just a fact now. Lots of people are dead. Behind her, Dr. Tanaka had caught up. She was breathing hard, her translator device clutched in her hand. It was designed to help humans communicate with the few alien species they had encountered, though nothing in its database had prepared her for this. Please, Dr. Tanaka said, holding up the translator like a shield. We mean no harm. I am Dr. Yuki Tanaka. This child is under our protection. There was an accident, a mining accident. The structural supports failed, and our central habitat collapsed. The translator beeped and whirred, trying to convert her words into something the dragon might understand. But the dragon's attention remained fixed on Ilara. An accident, it repeated. And there was something like doubt in that vast voice. Your young ones perished in an accident. And you call this acceptable? No one finds it acceptable, Dr. Tanaka said, frustration creeping into her voice. 37 children died, 143 adults. We are devastated, but it was not an attack. No one meant for this to happen. The dragon finally turned its attention to Dr. Tanaka. Being looked at by something so large and so other was like standing in front of a searchlight made of consciousness. The doctor stumbled backward, her translator clattering from her hand. In my experience, the dragon said, civilizations that claim harm to their young is accidental are either under siege or incompetent. Which are you? Before Dr. Tanaka could answer, more lights began to appear in the sky. Not from space this time, but from different directions, converging on New Haven from across the system. More dragons were coming. The survivors watched in growing fear as 11 more massive crystalline beings descended through the atmosphere. They landed in a ring around the colony, each one claiming a valley or hilltop. Their combined presence made the air itself feel heavy, charged with an energy that made hair stand on end and skin prickle. The first dragon, the one Ilara had been speaking to, made a sound like a bell being struck. The other dragons responded in kind, a chorus of crystal tones that resonated across the landscape. They were communicating, Ilara realized, talking to each other in a language of pure sound. What are they? Someone whispered in the crowd behind her. Dragons, Ilara said, and somehow the word felt right. Dr. Tanaka retrieved her translator and tried again. Please, we need to understand what you want. Are you here to help us or to harm us? The first dragon focused on her again. I am called Syrinx, it said, and this time the translator caught enough of the meaning to beep in confirmation. We are Drakari. We heard a child's cry across the void, and we came to answer. We protect the young. It is what we do. It is what we have always done. The girl's cry? Dr. Tanaka looked at Elara in confusion. But our communications were destroyed. How could you possibly have heard? Not your machines, another dragon interrupted. This one was slightly smaller than Syrinx. Its crystalline body shot through with veins of bright silver. The child's grief. It rang across dimensions your science has not named. When a young one cries in true desperation, we hear. We always hear. A murmur ran through the crowd of survivors. Some looked skeptical. Others looked terrified. A few looked hopeful. You came because a child was crying? One of the miners asked, disbelief clear in his voice. You crossed space because of that? Yes, Syrinx said simply. Does this surprise you? Do you not answer when your young call out in pain? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Dr. Tanaka cleared her throat. Of course we do. But you are not human. You are not her family. Why would you come so far for a child, not your own? The dragons seemed to confer again, their crystal voices ringing across the valley. Finally, a third dragon spoke. This one was the largest of all. Its form more angular than the others. Each segment etched with patterns that might have been writing, or might have been natural formations. I am Kormath, it said. And its voice carried weight like stones settling. Your question reveals much about your kind. You believe care extends only to genetic bonds? That protection is owed only to one's own offspring? That's not what I meant, Dr. Tanaka said quickly. We Drakari measure a civilization by how it treats all young, not merely its own, Kormath continued. A species that allows its juveniles to suffer, that permits conditions where children die in preventable disasters, is a species that has lost its way. We have seen many such species across the ages. Most did not survive their own callousness. The air grew colder. The survivors pressed closer together, sensing the shift in tone. Are you threatening us? A voice called from the crowd. It was one of the security officers. His hand on his weapon. We do not threaten, Syrinx said. We observe, we judge, and we act according to what we find. That is why we have come. To understand what manner of beings would allow this tragedy to occur. It was an accident, someone shouted. The company said it was unavoidable. The company? A fourth dragon spoke now. This one smaller and quicker looking than the others. Its surface was mirror bright, reflecting the landscape around it. There is a company? This was a commercial operation? We are a mining colony, Doctor, Tanaka explained. The Zheng Patel Mining Consortium hired us to extract stellarium crystals from the planet's crust. They own the colony. They manage the operations. The dragons fell silent. Even without understanding their body language, the humans could sense something had changed. The air felt heavier, more dangerous. You mine for profit, Kormath said slowly, in a place where children live. And when the mines collapse, killing your young? You call this an accident? The mines didn't collapse, Dr. Tanaka protested. The habitat domes failed. The engineering supports gave way. It was a structural problem. Not. And who built these structures? Syrinx asked. Who decided what level of safety was sufficient? Who determined that the risk was acceptable? Dr. Tanaka opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew the answers, and they didn't sound good when spoken aloud. The mirror-bright dragon moved closer, its segments shifting rapidly. I am Velrin, it said. I am young among our kind, only 12,000 of your years old. But even I have seen this pattern before. Civilizations that value profit over protection, that weigh the cost of safety against the cost of compliance, that sacrifice their future for their present. It's not like that, someone called out weakly. Isn't it? Velrin's voice was sharp now. Then explain to me why a child sat alone in the ruins for 3 days, with no guardian to comfort her. Explain why your structures failed. Explain why we crossed the galaxy to answer a cry that your own kind ignored. Elara had been silent through all of this, watching and listening. Now she spoke up, her voice small but clear. They didn't ignore me. They were just busy. Lots of people got hurt. The doctors had to help them first. Syrinx lowered its head toward her again. And you, small one, did anyone help you? Did anyone hold you while you cried? Elara shook her head. The dragons hummed together. A sound like grief made audible. We will remain here, Cormoth announced, its voice resonating across the colony. We will investigate what happened. We will examine your structures and your systems. We will determine if this was truly an accident or something worse. And if we find that your kind is guilty of negligence, of valuing wealth over the welfare of your young. The dragon didn't finish the sentence. It didn't need to. And if you try to stop us, Velrin added, if your ships come with weapons, if you attempt to drive us away, know this. We are old. We are powerful. And we are very, very patient. You cannot hide truth from beings who have watched stars be born. In orbit above the planet, proximity alarms began to sound on the approaching human fleet. 12 massive contacts had appeared on sensors, their energy signatures unlike anything in the database. The fleet commander stared at the readings and felt a cold knot form in her stomach. On the surface, Dr. Tanaka looked at the dragons surrounding the colony and knew that everything had changed. Humanity had been judged by beings older than their oldest civilizations, and the verdict was not yet decided. Elara reached up and took Dr. Tanaka's hand. The doctor looked down at the small girl, surprised. They're not going to hurt us, Elara said with certainty. They're here to help. They just want to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other kids. How do you know that? Dr. Tanaka whispered. Elara looked up at Syrinx, and the dragon looked back, and something passed between them that needed no translation. Because they heard me when no one else could, Elara said simply. And they came. The human fleet arrived 2 days after the dragons landed. 12 warships, bristling with weapons designed to crack open asteroids and fight off pirates. They took up positions in high orbit, maintaining distance but making their presence known. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring at the sensor displays with growing unease. Each dragon registered on the screens as a contact the size of a small moon, radiating energy in spectrums her equipment could barely measure. Ma'am, her tactical officer said nervously. We could engage, but the power readings suggest they could destroy the fleet without significant effort. Then we don't engage, Admiral Chen said quietly. We watch, and we pray they're as peaceful as the surface reports suggest. On the ground, the investigation had begun in earnest. Syrinx, Cormoth, and Velrin had started examining the ruins of the collapsed dome, but they didn't use tools or scanners that humans would recognize. Instead, they simply placed portions of their crystalline bodies against the wreckage and seemed to listen. Dr. Tanaka watched from a safe distance, taking notes on her datapad. What are they doing? She asked one of the colony engineers standing beside her. I have no idea, the engineer admitted. But look at this. He pointed to his own scanner. The debris is showing signs of temporal displacement, like they're looking backward through time. As impossible as it sounded, that seemed to be exactly what the dragons were doing. Syrinx moved through the rubble, with surprising grace for something so large, touching collapsed beams and shattered panels. Each time it made contact, faint images seemed to shimmer in the air around it. Elara watched from her spot near Dr. Tanaka. She had stayed close to the doctor since the dragons arrived, finding comfort in the woman's steady presence. Now she tugged on the doctor's sleeve. They're seeing what happened, Elara said. They can see the before. How do you know that? Dr. Tanaka asked gently. Syrinx showed me, Elara said. In my head, they can read the echoes. Everything that happens leaves echoes. And they can read them like we read books. Dr. Tanaka knelt down beside the girl. Elara, honey, can you understand them? The dragons? Elara nodded. Not their words exactly, but their meanings. It's like they put the ideas right into my thoughts. This was troubling news. But before Dr. Tanaka could pursue it further, Cormath called out in that ground-shaking voice. We would speak with those who managed this colony. Several of the surviving administrators came forward, looking nervous. Among them was Mr. Petrov, who had been the assistant operations manager, and Miss Williams, the safety compliance officer. Both had survived because they were in an outer dome when the collapse happened. Cormath regarded them with what might have been eyes, though it was hard to tell. Explain your safety procedures. How did you determine that your structures were sound? Mr. Petrov cleared his throat. We followed all standard protocols. Weekly inspections of load-bearing structures. Monthly stress tests on the dome seals. Everything was according to code. 17 was not a calls. Code, Velrin repeated, and the word sounded wrong in that crystalline voice. Whose code? Who wrote these rules? The Interplanetary Safety Commission, Miss Williams said. It's the standard for all human colonies. We had certification. We passed every audit. Show us these audits. Sarix commanded. The next hour was spent pulling up records on portable terminals. The dragons examined everything with patience that seemed infinite. They looked at inspection reports, maintenance schedules, and structural plans, and the more they looked, the quieter they became. Finally, Cormath spoke. These audits are falsified. The statement fell like a bomb. The administrators went pale. That's impossible, Mr. Petrov stammered. I watched the inspectors myself. They tested everything. They signed documents, Cormath interrupted. But they did not inspect thoroughly. We can see the truth in the echoes. The support beams in Sector 7 were manufactured with substandard alloys. The seals on Dome 3 were rated for only 60% of the stress they regularly endured. The foundation anchors were placed at intervals wider than your own safety code required. But the inspectors approved it all, Miss Williams whispered. They had credentials. They were certified by the commission. Velrin moved closer, its mirror surface reflecting the horrified faces of the administrators. And who paid these inspectors? No one answered at first. Then Mr. Petrov said quietly, The company. Zheng Patel paid for the audits. That's standard practice. The colony doesn't have the budget to. The company paid those who would judge the company's safety, Sarix said, and there was something like disgust in its voice. And you saw no conflict in this arrangement? It's how it's always done, Mr. Petrov said weakly. Then how it is always done, Cormath declared, is corrupt. The word hung in the air. Some of the colonists looked ashamed. Others looked angry, but not at the dragons. Their anger was directed elsewhere. One of the miners, a woman named Rosa, who had lost her 2 sons in the collapse, stepped forward. We complained, she said, her voice shaking. 6 months ago, we filed a report about cracks forming in the central dome. We said the supports were making strange noises. We were told it was normal settling, and to get back to work. Who told you this? Velrin asked. The site manager. He said we were being paranoid. He said shutting down for repairs would cost the company millions. He said we had quotas to meet. Rosa's hands were balled into fists. My boys died because of quotas. More voices joined hers. Other colonists came forward with stories of ignored warnings, dismissed concerns, and safety measures bypassed to save time or money. The picture that emerged was ugly. Sarix listened to all of it, then broadcast a signal that reached far beyond the planet. On Earth, on Mars, on every human world with communications equipment, a voice suddenly spoke. I am Sarix of the Drakari. We have come to the colony world called New Haven in response to a distress call. We have investigated the disaster that claimed 180 lives, including 37 juveniles. We have examined the evidence. We have heard testimony. And we have reached a conclusion. 1. Across human space, billions of people stopped what they were doing to listen. This disaster was preventable, Sarix continued. The structures failed because they were built to insufficient standards. The standards were insufficient because they were written to favor cost over safety. The safety measures were ignored because profit was valued over protection. The warnings of your people were dismissed because production schedules mattered more than their lives. On Earth, in the headquarters of the Jung Patel Mining Consortium, executives scrambled to their lawyers. On colony worlds, workers gathered around screens, listening. On New Haven, the survivors felt vindication and rage mixing in their hearts. This civilization, Sarix said, prioritizes wealth over welfare. It quantifies the lives of its young in profit margins. It calls preventable deaths accidents and continues the practices that caused them. That's not fair, someone shouted at a viewing screen on Mars. You don't understand human economics. You can't judge our entire species based on one incident. But the dragons were not done. Cormath's voice joined Sarix's. We have existed for millions of your years. We have observed thousands of civilizations. We know the pattern. What begins with acceptable losses ends with extinction. Species that do not protect their young do not deserve a future among the stars. Panic spread across human space. What did that mean? Were the dragons threatening extinction? Invasion? Some called for immediate military action. Others called for negotiation. Many simply didn't know what to do. On New Haven, Velrin made an announcement that changed everything. We will remain here, it said, until we see evidence that humanity understands the gravity of its failure. We will not leave until we see meaningful change. This is not an invasion. This is an intervention. You will fix this, or you will prove yourselves unworthy of the stars you claim to explore. Admiral Chen, listening from orbit, made a decision. Stand down all weapons, she ordered. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. We're calling Earth for instructions, but Earth was in chaos. The government couldn't decide on a response. Some politicians demanded the dragons leave immediately. Others suggested negotiation. A few brave voices said, maybe the dragons had a point. Meanwhile, the Jung Patel Mining Consortium released a statement. The recent tragedy at New Haven was the result of unforeseeable geological instability. The company followed all applicable safety regulations and deeply regrets the loss of life. The allegations made by the alien entities are based on misunderstanding of human industrial practices and economic necessities. We reject their characterization of our operations as negligent. Our men. Roundabout. Our men. Our men. Our men. Our men. The statement was carefully worded by expensive lawyers. It admitted nothing. It blamed natural causes. It painted the dragons as outsiders who didn't understand human complexity. Sarix read the statement and made a sound like mountains cracking. They deny responsibility. Of course they do, Velrin said, its mirror surface rippling with anger. This is what failing civilizations do. They lie to preserve power. But Cormath was examining something else. The old dragon had been processing the data from Earth's networks, reading everything humans had written about themselves. News reports, social media, message boards, historical records. It was building a picture of humanity that went beyond New Haven. Wait, Cormath said slowly. Look at this. They are not all in agreement. Many humans are angry about what happened here. They demand accountability. They call for change. It was true. Across human space, protests were erupting. Workers demanded better safety standards. Parents demanded protection for their children. Activists pointed to New Haven as proof that corporate power had gone too far. The movement called itself the Alara Accords, named after the little girl whose cry had brought the dragons across the stars. Within days, millions had signed petitions demanding reform. Governments faced pressure to act. Even some corporate executives, seeing which way the wind was blowing, began to distance themselves from Jung Patel. Dr. Tanaka watched the news feeds with growing hope. "They're listening," she said to Alara. "People are listening." Alara sat beside her, holding the doctor's hand. Sarix had given her a gift the night before, a small crystal that glowed with inner light. The dragon said it was so Alara could call if she ever needed help again. "Some of them are listening," Alara said wisely. "But not all of them." She was right. Because in the shadows, the Jung Patel Consortium was making plans that involved mercenaries, false evidence, and a desperate gamble to turn humanity against the dragons before the investigation could destroy the company completely. In orbit, sensors detected unusual ship movements. Small vessels, unmarked, moving into position around the system. Admiral Chen noticed but assumed they were journalists or independent observers drawn by the news. She was wrong. The countdown to disaster had begun, and no one saw it coming. The attack came without warning on the 14th day after the dragons arrived. A civilian station in the neighboring Kepler system, home to 5,000 people, lit up on sensors across the sector. Then it went dark. Admiral Chen received the distress signal fragments before communications were lost. Weapons fire, energy signatures, and then silence. "Get me visual confirmation," she ordered, her stomach knotting with dread. Now, the tactical display showed the aftermath. The station was badly damaged, several modules completely destroyed. Initial estimates put casualties in the hundreds, and the weapon signatures matched nothing in the human arsenal. They matched the dragons. "No," Admiral Chen whispered. But the data was clear. The energy weapons that had torn through the station's hull matched the frequencies the dragons naturally emitted. It was their signature, their fingerprint. Within hours, the news spread across human space. The dragons had attacked. The peaceful intervention had been a lie. They weren't here to help. They were invaders, and they had just shown their true nature. On New Haven, Dr. Tanaka confronted Sarix with fury in her eyes. "You attacked a civilian station. You killed hundreds of innocent people." Sarix's crystalline body rippled with what might have been confusion. "We did no such thing. None of our kind have left this world since we arrived. The energy signatures match yours exactly," Dr. Tanaka said, holding up her datapad with the evidence. "The weapons used were dragon weapons. Who else could it have been?" "I do not know," Sarix said, and there was something like concern in that vast voice. "But we did not do this. We do not harm the innocent. It violates everything we are." "Then explain the evidence," Dr. Tanaka shouted. She couldn't. None of the dragons could. And across human space, the verdict was already being decided. The dragons had killed humans. They were hostile. They had to be stopped. Protests that had supported the Alara Accords turned against the dragons. Politicians who had called for reform now called for military action. The narrative flipped overnight. These aliens weren't saviors exposing corruption. They were threats, hiding behind concern for children. Only Alara seemed uncertain. She sat with Sarix in the valley, her small hand pressed against the dragon's crystalline surface. "You didn't do it," she said. "It wasn't a question." "No, small one. We did not." "Then who did?" Sarix was silent for a long moment. Then Velrin, the mirror-bright dragon, joined them. Its surface was rippling rapidly, processing information at speeds no human computer could match. "I have analyzed the attack data," Velrin said. "The signatures are too perfect. They match our energy output exactly, which should be impossible. Even among our own kind, there are subtle variations. These signatures show no variation at all. Fabricated? Kormoth asked, moving closer. Or copied, Velrin said. Someone studied our emissions and reproduced them. This was designed to make humans believe we attacked. Who would do such a thing? Dr. Tanaka asked. She had followed Alara to the valley, unable to let the child out of her sight, with tensions rising. The answer came from an unexpected source. One of the colony's computer technicians, a young man named David, came running up with a portable terminal. Doctor, I found something in the company's encrypted files. I was trying to recover data from the damaged servers and I found orders. Orders to a mercenary group called the Black Fleet. He held up the terminal. The message was clear. Simulate dragon energy signatures. Target civilian population. Make it look like an unprovoked attack. The payment amount was staggering, and the signature at the bottom belonged to a Zheng Patel executive. They did this, Dr. Tanaka breathed. The company did this. They killed their own people to turn humanity against the dragons. Syrinx and Velrin moved with sudden speed. Their crystalline bodies resonated at frequencies that made the air vibrate. They were searching, scanning, hunting for the source of the deception. There, Velrin said. Its mirror surface reflecting a point in space. A ship, heavily shielded. It's been in orbit since before the attack. I can detect residual energy matching the weapon signatures. The dragons shared the coordinates with Admiral Chen's fleet. The Admiral, desperate for any explanation that didn't mean war with beings who could destroy her ships, ordered a boarding party to investigate. What they found confirmed everything. A mercenary vessel with modified weapons designed to mimic dragon energy. Payment records from Zheng Patel, and detailed plans for additional false flag attacks across human space. The mercenaries, when confronted, confessed everything. They had been hired to discredit the dragons, to give humanity a reason to unite against the aliens and forget about the safety violations that had caused the New Haven disaster. Admiral Chen broadcast her findings immediately. The truth spread across human space just as fast as the lie had. Within hours, the narrative flipped again. The Zheng Patel Consortium had murdered hundreds of humans to avoid accountability. They had weaponized fear and xenophobia. They had been willing to start an interstellar incident to protect their profits. The backlash was immediate and devastating. Stock prices crashed. Executives were arrested. Governments seized assets. The company that had seemed untouchable days ago was falling apart. But the damage was done. Hundreds were still dead. Human-dragon relations had been poisoned, and many dragons, seeing how easily humans had believed the worst of them, were questioning whether this species deserved their help. Kormoth called a gathering of the Dracari. All 12 dragons arranged themselves in a circle around the colony, and the humans below could only watch as the ancient beings deliberated in tones that made the ground shake. Dr. Tanaka held Alara close, watching the sky. "What are they deciding?" she asked. "Whether we're worth saving?" Alara said quietly. "They've seen this before. Species that would rather destroy each other than admit they were wrong. Species that value power more than truth. And what will they decide?" Alara closed her eyes, sensing something through her connection to Syrinx. "They're arguing. Some want to leave. They say humans are too violent, too deceptive. But others say we're young. That young species make mistakes. That the question is whether we learn from them." The discussion went on for hours. Inside that circle of dragons, in frequencies humans couldn't hear, a trial was taking place. Humanity was being judged not by what they had done, but by what they might become. Meanwhile, across human space, something remarkable was happening. The Alara Accords, which had briefly lost support during the attack, came roaring back stronger than ever. But now, it was different. Now, it wasn't just about safety regulations or corporate accountability. People were demanding fundamental change. They wanted governments that valued life over profit. They wanted systems that couldn't be corrupted by wealth. They wanted to prove to the dragons, and to themselves, that humanity could be better. Protests filled the streets of Earth's major cities. Mars declared a general strike. The outer colonies refused to ship resources until new safety standards were implemented. It was messy and chaotic and completely unprecedented. A coalition formed almost overnight. Child welfare advocates, labor unions, ethical scientists, and reformist politicians united around a single goal: show the dragons that humanity could change. They called themselves the New Covenant. And they drafted a framework for reform that was radical in its scope: mandatory safety standards with independent oversight, criminal liability for executives whose cost-cutting caused deaths, protected status for all workers who reported violations, and most importantly, a new principle enshrined in law. The welfare of children takes precedence over all economic concerns. It was idealistic. It was probably unenforceable in its current form. But it was genuine. Dr. Tanaka watched the news feeds with tears in her eyes. "They're really doing it," she said. "They're really trying to change." Alara squeezed her hand. "Some of them are." In the circle of dragons, the debate reached its conclusion. Sarix spoke for the group, its voice carrying across the colony and up to the fleet in orbit. "We have deliberated," it said. "We have witnessed both the worst and the best of humanity in these past weeks. We have seen greed and deception, but we have also seen courage and the will to change." Every human in the system held their breath. "Humanity is flawed," Sarix continued. "You are young as species go, and you carry the violence and selfishness of your evolutionary past. But you also carry something else: the capacity for growth, the ability to look at your mistakes and choose differently." Kormath's voice joined in. "This is rare. Many species we have encountered double down on their failures. They defend the indefensible rather than admit fault. But you, at least some of you, have chosen accountability over pride." Velrin spoke last. "We are not yet convinced that humanity is ready for the stars, but we are willing to give you a chance to prove yourselves. That is more than we give most species." 8. Relief washed over the human listeners, but it was tempered by the dragon's next words. "We will withdraw to high orbit," Sarix said. "We will watch from a distance as you implement these changes you promise. If you follow through, if you show genuine commitment to protecting your young and valuing life over wealth, we will return with an offer of partnership. But if you fail," Kormath warned, "if this moment of clarity fades and you return to the patterns that caused this tragedy, we will ensure you harm no others. We will contain your species to your current systems. You will spread no further until you prove worthy of the privilege. The choice is yours," Velrin finished. "We have given you a mirror to see yourselves clearly. What you do with that reflection will determine your future." One by one, the dragons began to lift off. Their massive crystalline forms rose into the sky, catching the light of New Haven's twin suns and scattering rainbows across the clouds. But Sarix remained behind, settled in its valley. It had one more task to complete. Alara ran to the edge of the valley, Dr. Tanaka following close behind. "You're leaving?" the girl called out. "The others are leaving," Sarix said gently. "I will remain for a short time longer. I wish to give you something. Small one. A gift and a responsibility." The dragon lowered its great head until it was close to Alara. A portion of its crystalline surface began to glow, brighter and brighter, until a small fragment detached and floated down to hover in front of the girl. "This is a beacon," Sarix explained. "It contains a part of my essence, and through it, you carry the ability to call us. If humanity truly needs our help, if another child cries out in desperation, and there is no one to answer, you or your descendants can use this to reach across the stars." Alara reached out and touched the fragment. It was warm, and it hummed with energy. She gasped, feeling the connection establish itself in her very cells. She could sense Sarix more clearly now. And beyond the dragon, faintly, she could sense the others retreating into space. She could feel their doubt and their hope mixed together. "I understand," Elara whispered. "I'll keep it safe. I promise." "I know you will," Sarek said. "You are stronger than you know. Small one. Stronger than even I realized when I first heard your cry. Perhaps that is why we were drawn here. Not just to judge humanity, but to find you." The dragon began to rise, lifting out of the valley with grace that defied its size. "Will I see you again?" Elara called out. "That depends on your species," Sarek said as it climbed toward the stars. "Prove yourselves worthy, and we will return not as judges, but as friends. Show us that a child's life matters more than profit, and we will show you wonders beyond your imagination." Then it was gone, leaving only a fading rainbow in its wake. Dr. Tanaka put her arm around Elara's shoulders. "Are you okay?" Elara nodded, her hand pressed against her chest where the beacon now rested. "I can still feel them. They're sad and hopeful at the same time. They want us to succeed. They really do. Then we better not disappoint them," Dr. Tanaka said firmly. Across human space, people were saying the same thing. The hard work was just beginning. The promises made in passion had to become policies. The ideals had to become institutions. It would take years, maybe decades, but for the first time in a long time, humanity was looking at itself honestly. And what they saw, while not pretty, was not hopeless either. The dragons had held up a mirror. Now it was up to humans to decide what to do about the reflection. 6 months passed. 6 months of the hardest work humanity had ever done. The new covenant had evolved from a protest movement into a political force that couldn't be ignored. Governments fell and reformed. Corporations restructured or went bankrupt. The Jung Patel Consortium was dismantled entirely, its assets seized and redistributed to the victims of New Haven. But change was messy and painful. For every step forward, there seemed to be 2 steps sideways. Some colonies embraced the new safety standards enthusiastically. Others resisted, claiming the regulations would make mining and manufacturing economically impossible. On Earth, the debates raged in parliament buildings and on street corners. Could they really afford to put life before profit? Would the economic cost be too high? Some argued that humanity would lose its competitive edge, whatever that meant in a galaxy where they had met only one other intelligent species. Dr. Tanaka had become an unexpected leader in the movement. She traveled from world to world, testifying before committees, speaking at rallies, and telling the story of New Haven over and over. She carried pictures of the victims, including Elara's parents. And she never let people forget the cost of cutting corners. Elara stayed on New Haven, living with a foster family that Dr. Tanaka had carefully selected. The colony was being rebuilt, with proper materials and proper oversight this time. The girl went to the new school that had been built according to the strictest safety standards in human history. And every night, she felt the beacon in her chest, a warm presence that connected her to beings watching from beyond the stars. The dragons had not left entirely. They maintained a presence at the edge of the system, 12 crystalline forms holding position near the outer asteroid belt. They said nothing. They made no demands. They simply watched. Admiral Chen, now stationed permanently in the New Haven system, filed weekly reports on the dragon positions. They never moved, never communicated, just watched and waited. "It's like being under a microscope," one of her officers complained. "How long are they going to just hover there?" "As long as it takes," Admiral Chen replied. She had come to respect the dragons during the crisis. They had shown remarkable restraint when humans had believed the worst of them. "They're giving us a chance. That's more than we probably deserve." Then, on the first day of the 7th month, everything went wrong. A new group emerged from the shadows of human society. They called themselves the Purity Front. And they had a simple message. Humanity should bow to no alien judgment. The dragons had no right to observe humans, no right to set conditions, no right to judge human civilization by alien standards. At first, they seemed like a fringe group, easy to dismiss. But their membership grew quickly. fed by resentment and fear. People who had lost jobs due to the new regulations. Industries that had been shut down for safety violations. Politicians who had lost power when the old systems were reformed. The Purity Front began small, with protests and propaganda. But they had backing from wealthy interests who missed the old ways. And they had a plan. On a mining station in the Proxima system, a Purity Front cell sabotaged the new safety equipment that had been installed. They made it fail in a way that looked like the equipment itself was faulty. 3 miners died in the accident that followed. The group then broadcast a message across human space. They just cost money and lives. We don't need aliens to tell us how to live. It was a lie, of course. The equipment had been deliberately sabotaged. But the message found an audience among those who wanted to believe it. More incidents followed. In each case, the pattern was the same. Sabotage made to look like the new safety measures failing. And with each incident, the Purity Front's message gained traction. Dr. Tanaka watched the movement grow with growing dread. "They're going to ruin everything," she said to Admiral Chen during one of their regular check-ins. "The dragons are watching. If they think humanity is rejecting the changes, if they think we're going back to the old ways, they'll leave," Admiral Chen finished. "Or worse. They'll make good on their threat to contain us." In her foster home on New Haven, Elara felt something shift in the beacon. The dragons were troubled. She could sense their disappointment, their growing conviction that humanity was proving them right to doubt. One night, she woke from a dream to find her room filled with gentle rainbow light. Sarix was speaking to her across the void, the beacon allowing communication that shouldn't have been possible. "Small one," the dragon's voice echoed in her mind. "We are losing faith. Your kind seems determined to learn nothing from tragedy. Should we depart and leave you to your fate?" "Please don't," Elara whispered into the darkness. "Some people are trying. Dr. Tanaka is trying. Lots of people are trying. It's just hard to change everything all at once." "Hard?" Sarix's voice carried sadness that was almost human. "I have watched 17 civilizations face this same choice. 12 chose comfort over growth. They all destroyed themselves eventually. Why should humanity be different?" Elara didn't have an answer. She was 7 years old. She didn't understand economics or politics or the complex forces that made adults do the things they did. But she understood something simpler. "Because you came when I cried," she said. "Because you showed us we could be better. Because some people are listening." There was a long silence. Then Sarix said, "Show me. Show me that your kind can truly change, and I will convince the others to remain. But I need proof, small one." Hope is not enough. The light faded, and Elara was left alone in the dark, feeling the weight of an impossible task. The next day, she told Dr. Tanaka everything. The doctor listened with growing concern. "Elara, honey, I'm doing everything I can. But the Purity Front is strong. They have money and influence. I don't know how to prove to the dragons that we're serious about change when half of humanity seems determined to go backward. We need to show them the truth," Elara said with the certainty of a child who sees things simply. "About the Purity Front, about the sabotage. We need to prove they're lying. We've tried. But they're clever. They cover their tracks. And people believe what they want to believe." But Elara had an idea. It came from the connection she shared with Sarix, from understanding how the dragons perceived the world. The dragons can see the truth. They can read echoes. If we brought them the evidence, they could prove what really happened. Dr. Tanaka sat up straighter. "That's actually brilliant. But how do we get them to look? They're maintaining their distance. They won't interfere." "I can ask," Elara said, touching her chest where the beacon rested. "Sarix gave me this, so I could call for help. This is help we need." That night, Elara reached out through the beacon, not with words, but with pure intention. She showed Sarix the sabotaged equipment, the deaths of the miners, and the lies being spread. She asked for help exposing the truth. The response came within hours. 3 dragons detached from the group at the asteroid belt and moved toward the Proxima system. Syrinx, Velrin, and Kormath arrived at the mining station where the recent accident had occurred. The Purity Front tried to block them. "You have no authority here," their representatives shouted. "This is human business," but the dragons ignored them. They examined the sabotaged equipment with their impossible senses, reading the echoes of what had truly happened. And then, they broadcast their findings across human space. The evidence was irrefutable. The dragons showed, in perfect detail, how the safety equipment had been deliberately tampered with. They identified the individuals who had done it. They traced the money that had paid for the sabotage, and they exposed the entire conspiracy. The Purity Front's support collapsed overnight. The truth, presented with dragon certainty and backed by evidence humans couldn't dispute, was devastating. People who had been swayed by the group's rhetoric felt betrayed. Governments arrested the conspirators. The movement fell apart, but the damage had been done. More people had died. The timeline for reform had been set back, and the dragons had seen, once again, how easily humans could be led astray by those who appealed to their fears and resentments. Kormath spoke publicly for the first time in months. "We are disappointed. Not surprised, but disappointed. We had hoped that the shock of New Haven would be enough to change your course, but we see now that change comes slowly to your kind. Too slowly. Perhaps, for the good of the galaxy." Panic spread. Were the dragons leaving? Were they implementing the containment they had threatened? But then something happened that no one expected. From every corner of human space, ordinary people began to speak up. Not politicians or corporate leaders or professional activists, just regular people who had been quietly working toward change in their own communities. A teacher on Mars who had implemented new safety protocols in her school. A factory worker on Titan who had reported violations despite threats to his job. A doctor on Europa who had established the first children's advocacy program in her colony. Hundreds, then thousands, then millions of voices saying the same thing. "We're trying. We're changing. It's not fast enough, but we're not giving up." They organized the largest peaceful demonstration in human history. On every human world, in every station and colony, people gathered. They didn't protest. They didn't make demands. They simply showed up, standing together in silence, holding pictures of children. On Earth, 10 million people filled the streets of major cities. In the orbital habitats, in the mining colonies, in the research stations at the edge of explored space, humans stood together. And in the center of every gathering was a picture of Elara, the little girl whose cry had started everything. The dragons watched from their position at the asteroid belt. They had seen demonstrations before, on other worlds, with other species. Usually, they meant nothing, just a show of emotion that faded when the effort became inconvenient. But this was different. Because the demonstrations didn't end. They continued. Day after day. People took time off work. They lost wages. They faced consequences. But they kept showing up, kept standing together, kept insisting that change was possible. On the 10th day of the demonstrations, Dr. Tanaka stood on a platform in front of the rebuilt colony on New Haven. Elara stood beside her, and when Dr. Tanaka spoke, her words were broadcast across human space. "We are not perfect," she said simply. "We have made terrible mistakes. We allowed greed to overcome compassion. We allowed convenience to override conscience. And children died because of it. But we are trying to do better. Not all of us. Not fast enough. But we are trying." She gestured to Elara. This child lost her parents because adults made bad choices. The dragons came because her grief was so pure and so desperate that it echoed across the stars. They came to help, and we met them with suspicion and violence. But they stayed anyway. They gave us a chance we didn't deserve. And now, we're asking, for one more chance. A chance to prove that humans can learn from our mistakes, that we can grow, that we can be worthy of the stars. The demonstration continued for 2 more days. Then, on the 13th day, the dragons moved. All 12 of them descended from the asteroid belt, forming a ring around New Haven. And Syrinx spoke. "We have deliberated. We have watched your efforts. We have seen both your progress and your failures. And we have reached a decision." The silence that followed Syrinx's words seemed to stretch forever. Every human in the system held their breath, waiting for the verdict that would determine their future among the stars. Syrinx's crystalline form caught the light of New Haven's twin suns, scattering rainbows across the rebuilt colony below. When it spoke again, its voice carried both weight and something that might have been warmth. "Humanity is flawed," the dragon said. "You are violent, selfish, and slow to learn. You cling to systems that harm you. You resist change, even when change could save you. In these ways, you are like many young species we have encountered." Dr. Tanaka felt her heart sink. This sounded like a prelude to rejection. "But," Syrinx continued, and the word hung in the air like a promise, "you are also capable of remarkable growth. When confronted with uncomfortable truths, many of you chose accountability over defensiveness. When shown your failures, you did not simply make excuses. You took action." 44. Kormoth's voice joined in, resonating through the ground. "The action has been imperfect, incomplete, slower than we would prefer. But it has been genuine. And that is what matters. Not perfection, but the honest effort to improve." Velrin, the mirror-bright dragon, spoke next. "We have watched 17 civilizations face similar crucibles. 12 failed utterly, destroying themselves through their inability to value their young over their wealth. 3 succeeded only after catastrophic collapse forced change upon them. 2 achieved what you are attempting now. Conscious, deliberate reform in the face of tragedy. Those 2 species," Kormoth said, "became our partners. They now travel the stars with wisdom earned through suffering. They protect other young civilizations from the mistakes they once made. They have become forces for good in a galaxy that often lacks compassion." Syrinx lowered its massive head toward the gathered crowd. "Humanity has demonstrated the capacity for such growth. You are not there yet. You may not be there for generations, but you have taken the first steps, and that is enough." Hope bloomed in human hearts like flowers after rain. "We will not leave," Syrinx declared. "Nor will we contain you. Instead, we offer a covenant, a partnership, conditional upon your continued growth." The dragon's form began to glow, brighter and brighter, until a structure materialized in the space above New Haven. It looked like a station, but made of the same crystalline material as the dragons themselves. It hung in orbit, beautiful and impossible, catching starlight and transforming it into living color. "This is a beacon station," Velrin explained. "It will remain at the edge of your system, watching but not interfering. As long as humanity continues on its current path, as long as you keep striving to protect your young and value life over profit, this station will remain. But if you falter," Kormoth warned, "if you return to the patterns that led to New Haven's tragedy, if another child's cry reaches us born of preventable suffering and deliberate negligence, we will return. Not as saviors, but as executors of our original judgment. We will ensure humanity spreads no further until you prove capable of doing so safely." It was both a promise and a threat, a hand extended in friendship, but with clear boundaries. "We understand," Dr. Tanaka said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And we accept your terms. We will do better. We have to do better." Syrinx turned its attention to Elara, and the girl stepped forward without fear. The dragon and the child regarded each other in silence for a long moment. "You carry a part of me, small one," Syrinx said gently. "The beacon I placed within you will remain. Should humanity ever truly need us, Should crisis come that you cannot face alone, you or your descendants can call. We will hear, and we will come. Elara nodded solemnly. I'll only use it if we really need help, I promise. I know you will. You have grown much since I first heard your cry. You have become stronger, wiser, kinder. You are proof that your species can evolve beyond its current limitations. The dragon paused, then added, I have a gift for you. For all of you. Saryx's body began to resonate at a frequency that made the air shimmer. Knowledge poured out. Not in words, but in pure understanding. Mathematics, physics, biology, medicine. Concepts that human science had been groping toward but couldn't quite grasp. It wasn't everything the dragons knew. That would have been overwhelming. But it was enough to accelerate human understanding by decades, perhaps centuries. Scientists across human space gasped as equations they had been struggling with suddenly made sense. Engineers saw solutions to problems that had seemed unsolvable. Doctors understood diseases they had only been able to treat symptomatically. Use this knowledge wisely, Kormath instructed. It is both a gift and a test. Technology can be used to protect or to harm. How you choose to use what we have given you will tell us much about your character as a species. We will use it to help people, Elara said with absolute certainty. That's what it's for, right? To make things better? That is always what knowledge is for, Saryx agreed. But not all beings use it that way. We hope humanity will be different. The dragons began to rise, one by one, lifting from their positions around New Haven. But this time, it didn't feel like an abandonment. It felt like a graduation, like parents stepping back to let their child walk on their own. We will watch from the beacon station, Velrin said, as it ascended, and we will hope. Hope that the next time we meet, it will be as equals, as partners exploring the wonders of the cosmos together. How will we know if we've succeeded? Someone called from the crowd. How will we know when we're ready? Troubler, 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 Kormath answered, its voice fading as it moved higher into the atmosphere. You will know when preventing suffering matters more than increasing profit, when protecting the vulnerable is automatic rather than exceptional, when children everywhere can grow up safe and cared for. Then, you will be ready. The dragons climbed toward the stars, their crystalline bodies leaving trails of rainbow light. They moved to the beacon station at the edge of the system and settled into positions around it. 12 guardians watching over a species that might, just might, become something wonderful. On New Haven, the celebration was subdued but genuine. People hugged each other, cried, and began planning for a future that suddenly seemed possible. Dr. Tanaka knelt beside Elara. You did it, she said softly. You brought them here. You saved us all. Elara shook her head. I just cried. They saved us. They showed us what we could be, and now we have to become it. Dr. Tanaka agreed. She looked up at the beacon station, just visible as a bright star on the horizon. I know, Elara said. She touched her chest where Saryx's beacon resided. But we can do it. I know we can. The years that followed were not easy. The changes promised during the crisis had to be implemented, refined, and defended against those who wanted to return to the old ways. But the beacon station remained in orbit, a constant reminder of what humanity had promised and what they stood to lose. Elara grew up under that watchful sky. She studied xenobiology and diplomacy, preparing for a future where humanity might encounter other species. She never forgot the day her tears echoed across the stars, or the beings who had answered. When she was 17, she gave a speech at the New Haven Memorial, now a beautiful park where the collapsed dome had once stood. I was 6 years old when I lost my parents, she told the assembled crowd. I was alone and scared, and I didn't think anyone cared. But I was wrong. Someone heard. Beings so ancient and powerful that I can barely understand them. Heard one little girl crying, and they crossed the galaxy to help. She paused, looking up at the sky where the beacon station gleamed. They didn't have to. We weren't their species. We weren't their responsibility. But they came anyway, because they believe that all children deserve protection, that all young deserve a chance to grow up safe. Since that day, we've worked hard to become worthy of their faith in us. We've changed laws, restructured industries, and rebuilt our values from the ground up. It hasn't been perfect. We still make mistakes, but we're trying, and that's what I want to tell every child watching this. You matter. Your safety matters. Your life matters more than any profit, any convenience, any excuse. The dragons taught us that, and we're never going to forget it. The speech was broadcast across human space and reached the beacon station at the edge of the system. The dragons listened, and they were pleased. 20 years after the New Haven disaster, humanity passed a milestone. A full solar year went by, without a single, preventable, industrial death. New safety systems, new oversight, and new cultural values had transformed how humans worked and lived. The beacon station pulsed with light, a signal of approval. 30 years after, the first generation of children raised entirely under the new system came of age. They had grown up knowing that their safety was paramount, that adults had a duty to protect them, that profit could never justify risk to young lives. They were different from their parents, more confident. And when they entered the workforce, they brought those values with them, refusing to accept conditions that earlier generations had tolerated. 50 years after Ilara's cry, humanity made contact with a second alien species. The meeting was tense at first. Both sides, uncertain and afraid. But the beacon station's presence, and the story of the dragons, changed the dynamic. We were judged once, humanity's ambassadors explained. We were found wanting, and we changed. We can show you how. The new species, facing similar growing pains, listened and learned, and chose to implement their own reforms rather than face their own moment of judgment. 70 years after, Ilara stood before the beacon station in a small ship. She was now humanity's ambassador to the Drakari, a position created specifically for communication with the ancient beings who watched from the edge of their space. She pressed her hand to the hull of the ship and felt the beacon within her chest resonate. Sarex's presence filled her mind, as clear as it had been when she was 6 years old. "Hello, old friend," she said aloud. "Small one," Sarex replied, though she wasn't small anymore. "You have grown well. Your species has grown well." "Are we ready?" Ilara asked. "Ready for what you promised? Partnership? Wonders beyond imagination?" There was a pause. Then Sarex said, "Not quite, but close. Perhaps another generation. Perhaps 2. You are learning patience, which is good. Rushing would undo much of your progress." "I can wait," Ilara said. "We can wait. We've learned that some things are worth doing slowly and doing right." "Yes," Sarex agreed. "You have learned that, and you have taught it to others. The species you recently contacted has asked us to observe them as well. Because of your example." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the beacon. "We're helping others? You are becoming what we hoped you might become. Not perfect, but striving. Not complete, but growing. And in doing so, you make the galaxy a little bit safer for all young ones who might otherwise cry unheard." Tears pricked Ilara's eyes. "My parents would have been proud. They would have been. And I am proud. Small one. You took the grief of your loss and transformed it into purpose. You became a beacon yourself, guiding your species toward a better future." The ship drifted near the station, and Ilara could see the 12 dragons resting in their positions, exactly as they had been for 7 decades. Patient, watchful, hoping. "When the time comes," Sarex said, "when humanity is truly ready, We will show you such wonders. Galaxies within galaxies. Dimensions beyond your current comprehension. Technologies that seem like magic. And most importantly, we will introduce you to the other species who passed this same test. You will join a confederation of the worthy, partners in protecting the young and guiding the growing. I'll make sure we're ready, Elara promised. I know you will, you and all those who come after you. That is the true gift, small one. Not the knowledge we gave, not the beacon you carry, but the example you set. Humanity's children will grow up knowing they are valued, and they will value others, in turn. The conversation ended, but the connection remained. It always would. Elara, and her children after her, and their children after them, would carry the beacon, a living reminder of the day the dragons came, a promise to never forget what had been learned. She looked back at New Haven, a thriving world now. No longer a tragedy, but a triumph. The memorial park was filled with children playing, safe and protected, growing up in a world that valued their lives above all else. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, ancient beings watched and waited and believed that humanity just might make it after all. The little girl's tears had echoed through the skies, and dragons had come answering the call. They had judged, and they had found humanity wanting, but they had also found humanity capable of change. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The beacon station pulsed gently in the darkness, a lighthouse guiding humanity toward a future among the stars. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday, when they were ready, when they were worthy. And every child who looked up at that distant star would know the story, would understand the promise, would carry forward the lesson that had been written in tears and answered by beings of crystal and light. That children matter, that life matters, that growing and changing and becoming better is always possible, if you're willing to listen when someone cries, and if you're brave enough to answer the call.